Hi and welcome to the Cloaked Hedgehog's YouTube channel. Today we're going to continue to listen to encounters from Michigan, and there might be part 3 one day, I don't know right now, but Michigan is the home of the Dogman. This is where it started with the name Michigan Dogman. So before you go traipsing through the woods in Michigan, maybe you should listen to these encounters. This encounter comes from griswoldmountain.com. I recently recalled an experience from my childhood that has been repressed in my mind since I was about 4 or 5 years old. As a child, I grew up in a 20-acre lot just on the outskirts of Cadillac. At that time, there were more tree coverage and fewer industrial sites in the area. We were mostly surrounded by woods. One early summer morning, I had gotten up before dawn to watch my dad go off to work. Some mornings he'd get up at 3:30 to 4 a.m. to start his days. Me and my mom would get up and send him on his way, daily routine back then. He'd always put on his work pants and work shirts over his regular clothes and proceed to go out to his truck and load his equipment for the day. His work clothes were the dark and mossy-looking material, really coarse-feeling. In the darkness, he'd look really shaggy-looking. The morning of my encounter, I had gotten up a little earlier than usual and was very groggy. I stumbled to the large plate glass window and saw something rummaging in the truck's bed over the side of the truck. I assumed it was just Dad, so I banged on the window to get his attention and wave. I was chilled to the bone by what peered back at me. A creature that stood on 2 feet, but for the life of me had the head of a dog, canine-like, but yet somehow human. We locked eyes for what seemed to be an eternity. Strangely enough, though, the eyes were not yellow as everyone else seems to see. They were pale yellow-green in color. I finally mustered a scream and fell backwards off the couch in front of the window. As I was falling backwards, the creature had already hit all fours and was lunging for the window. He started a good 20 feet away at the truck's back end. My scream had gotten my dad out of the bathroom and into the living room, yelling to my mom to hush me up. He looked out the window and asked me what I saw, but I was just sobbing. He went to the front door and turned on the porch light and found nothing. Annoyed that his morning was off to a not-so-quiet start, he made my mother take me back to bed and left for the day. I was so traumatized by this experience that I repressed it for all these years. It took looking up the Dogman and studying cryptozoology to kick the memory loose again. The house where this took place still stands, but the tree coverage that was abundant as a child is now history. Whatever this thing is, I'm sure he's still out there waiting. This is a shortish account from phantomsandmonsters.com. It takes place in the Upper Peninsula. I was driving north on Craig Lake Road towards Teddy Lake. As I approached Nestoria Road, I noticed something move off the edge of the road and into the woods. It was around 6:30 a.m. and a little bit dewy and foggy at the time, but I definitely saw something move. I stopped at the intersection and watched across Nestoria Road. I first thought it was a moose, but this thing was much too agile. I took a slow left turn and looked to my right into the woods. I didn't see anything, so I looked forward and sped up. Immediately, this animal ran out of the woods in front of my car and jumped across the road to the south side. It took 3 long strides and was gone, almost like it vanished through an invisible wall. I was shocked. I continued driving a few minutes but had to pull off and stop. I was literally shaking from head to toe. I sat there wondering what it was. It wasn't all fours. It had back legs like those of a large man. It had jet black fur and looked like a very large wolf, other than the back legs and the human-like rump. There was no tail. The profile of the head and snout were that of a wolf. It didn't make a sound. Because of the legs, you can say that this was a Type 3 Dogman. And that means it's more Sasquatch-like, but more slender and with a snout and pointy ears and claws. Or it was a humongous black bear, but I doubt that the witness wouldn't have recognized a bear if he saw one, so it's doubtful it was that. This is the story of the Benden track, which was photographed. The sighting is told second-hand by the brother-in-law of the witness, because the witness is a prominent person in local government and wishes to remain anonymous. The situation started last Saturday night around midnight when he was coming home from a friend's house in Benzonia and taking the back way home to Traverse City. He stated that while traveling down Cinder Road, several miles outside of the town of Benden, he observed a pair of reflecting eyes of his headlights ahead of him. Thinking that it was probably a deer alongside the road, he began to slow down. As he got closer, however, he stated that the object was much larger and much darker than a deer. He said that by this time he had slowed to around 30 miles per hour and was at that point several hundred feet from the creature, which still hadn't moved. As he approached further, he stated that the only way he could describe the creature was being similar to a very large dark wolf. However, he observed that the thing wasn't on 4 legs, but was upright on his back 2 legs, standing near a roadkill deer. He estimated that the creature stood a little over 6 feet tall and had very dark fur. He stated that by now he was going slow enough to bring his truck to a stop in the road and observe the creature, which had not yet moved and was still staring at him. He told me that for a brief second he believed the object was a giant stuffed animal, put there as some kind of joke, due to the fact that he had never seen anything like this in his life, and that he was able to drive up on it as close as it was without it having moved an inch. He told me, however, that before he could finish that thought, the creature then dropped to all fours and sprinted across the road and disappeared in the woods on the other side of the roadway. He told me that he stayed frozen in his seat for a minute, wondering in the middle of the road of what the heck had just happened. I jokingly asked him if he'd been drinking that night, and with a deadly serious face he stated no. Whatever that was, it was for real. As perplexed as he was that night over what he had seen, he was deathly afraid to go wandering into the woods to investigate further. He said that using a flashlight he observed an animal's tracks leading into the woods on the opposite side of the road, and was fortunate enough that night to have his digital camera with him. He showed me a photograph of the paw print, which he said appeared to be about 7 or 8 inches long. He had another picture of the same paw print, where he had placed a shotgun shell in the middle of it for scale. He told me that he was lucky that the side of the road was so soft, because he wasn't willing to go any farther than 2 or 3 steps away from the door to his truck to get a picture. I inquired if the animal had made any sounds before it disappeared, and he said he did not hear it make any noise, and were it not for the picture, he would have thought he had imagined the whole thing. I asked him if it could have been a bear, and he stated absolutely not. He bear hunts every year in the Upper Peninsula, so he obviously knows what bears look like up close. This is an encounter that I found very spooky, and it comes from phantomsandmonsters.com. Hey, I'm Mike from the Sheboygan, Michigan area. This is true what I'm about to describe. On November 24th, 2010, me and two of my friends went out at night around midnight. We were not hunting, but we had weapons. We were looking for a spot to set up our blinds for the muzzle loading season when we crossed from a field with tons of deer beddings, and we came into another field with none whatsoever. We continued through this field and came across a kind of game trail. We decided to venture down this trail into the woods. We got maybe 300 yards back in it and started hearing heavy breathing and snapping sounds in the thick brush to our right. We thought maybe coyotes, but we got to a corner, and that's where we stopped in our tracks. In front of us, maybe 60 yards away, was something blacker than the woods, standing on 2 feet and stood between 6'8" and 7'4". We slowly turned away and backtracked. Before we got to the field, the same thing was in front of us again. We turned around for a second time and then turned back, and it was gone. When we got into the field, we noticed there were 4 or more of these creatures, one on each corner of the field, just standing there. We saw one move halfway behind a tree. At this point we were freaking out. We made our way through the field and got to the edge, and there was one standing directly in the middle of the trail entering the woods. We hauled butt back home, and the whole way we felt like we were being watched and stalked. We have been out every night since then. We have learned to not use lights because it comes closer than 60 yards. The closest it has been to me was maybe 25 yards, and it was moving closer. At that point I shot at it. There were 5 total we saw the first night, and after I shot at one, we went out the last night and there were only 4, and they seemed more aggressive. In the field, it seems they tried herding us into a corner. You can believe this or not, but I'm in the Michigan National Guard, and I put what I saw on my warrior ethos and army values. That stalking business creeps me out. Well, anyway, this was all for today, but like I said in the beginning, there might be another episode of Michigan sometime in the future, but probably not before I posted a bunch of other stuff. But still, keep an eye open for that on my channel. And remember to check the description below. And be safe, and I'll see you next time.